All right, hello and welcome to the Yet Another Value podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Walker, and with me today, I'm excited to have Javier Lovato. Javier is the founder of the Blind Squirrel Substack. How's it going?
Yeah, pretty good. I'm excited to be here, and I was looking forward to it.
Hey, I'm happy to have you. You're our first guest coming at us from Spain, so it's good to expand the international opportunity. But let me start the podcast the way I do every podcast, and that's by pitching you, my guest. I only stumbled on you a month or so ago. You put out a write-up on the company we're going to talk about today, Netflix. And I read it. And when I was reading it, I was thinking to myself the whole time, this is so good. Like if you covered up the title and you just gave it to me, I'd be like, oh, one of the tech experts like Matthew Ball or Ben Thompson over at Stratechery, they just put out a new like updated thesis on Netflix. But no, it was this Blind Squirrel Substack that only had 3 posts so far. And I was like, this is incredible. This is a great piece of work. As soon as I read it, I knew I wanted to have you on. I reached out to you. I've been telling you, please come on. So I'm just really happy to get to have you on. I think everyone should go check out your Substack. It is awesome. It reminds me, if you keep up with it, it reminds me of like an early Scuttle blurb or something, which I've got huge respect for. So that pitch out the way, let's turn to the company we're going to talk about. That's Netflix. I'm sure everyone knows it. Ticker's NFLX. Disclosure, I think you have a position in it, but I'll just open it up by asking you, why is Netflix a good investment right now?
Well, first of all, I want to thank you for the endorsement there. I think your work is amazing, and thank you very much.
I appreciate that, man. I appreciate that.
Okay, first of all, I think it's a really compelling opportunity given we tend to have more leisure time, increasing amount of time, and we spend that time with video, social social networks and video games, and you have the opportunity to own a piece of a company that's providing thousands of hours of content to millions of subscribers every single day, and you don't really depend on any given title. So it's more like a platform-like play. It's not a hit-driven business because any given sub is not going to churn because they don't like one title or the other, and it's more insulated from the always dynamics playing out in terms of we want more short form content. There's TikTok and that stuff, but we've always watched TV, we've always watched entertainment, and storytelling is intrinsic to human being, and I think we'll always be attracted to that form of entertainment.
Perfect. No, that makes sense, and all of that makes sense. But I guess the underlying your whole theme is that Netflix, I think, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think a big piece of your theme is Netflix has this huge scale advantage, right? And I think it would come in a few places. A, because they've got a lot of personalized data on you. They can offer you titles and kind of fill up your viewing time better than anyone else. And then B, I think their international scale, you think about something with like Lupin, right? Which was a breakout international hit, and that was filmed locally in France, and it's dubbed over. And like the smaller services aren't going to have those international hits, so it's going to be much more different. I was wondering if you could dive into those two different pieces of kind of the scale argument for Netflix.
Sure. So first of all, scale. I mean, you are it's close to 210 subscribers, 210 million subscribers in the world, and you're basically huge. A huge company. You can spread the cost of failure of any given title between a huge subscriber base, so you can make bold bets. What I mean by this is you can invest in content that wasn't previously feasible or wasn't was thought it was too risky, and you can do that because you can spread the cost of failure among a huge subscriber base. Then you basically can afford to pay up more, but there are huge capitalized companies, tech companies that can't pay up for content. So even though you can still pay up more and you'll always have that scale advantage, I think scale is not based on paying more dollars for splashy titles or for big marquee names titles like Jennifer Aniston or that kind of stuff. I think the most relevant features of scale is that Netflix is always present on the conversation, the global conversation. So, like you said, titles like Lupin or titles like Bridgerton. I mean, they are part of our lives. I mean, if your coworker is talking about The Witcher, or your coworker is talking about your friend is talking about, I don't know, Bridgerton or that kind of titles, I mean, you'll be attracted to that kind of service, and you want to watch what everyone is watching. So I think that's interesting. And there's another point I'd like to make. I think if we just think about the creators, the people the actors, the directors who do the movies, they are attracted to Netflix because this is a service that provides them a platform where they couldn't previously produce content. So you have low budget films like Below Zero in Spain. It's produced by a director who's not really known in Spain, and this film has like 50 million views on Netflix. So that's huge because you are a platform to the world. You're basically democratizing the way that content creation is now produced. Because if you just think it for a second, our tastes in content, what's trending, what's not, what we used to watch at cinemas or big franchises are mostly US. Basically, every single big franchise is American. Star Wars, I mean, most of the bigger franchises are American. Why? Because there wasn't a way that local producers could invest big budgets into producing big titles, and now they have the opportunity, and this is unleashing a huge amount of creativity around the world. I mean, you have, for example, Klaus, which is an animation movie. It's created by a Spanish animator, and this type of animation haven't been produced in Spain for years, and now it's feasible to produce this type of content because there's a player, Netflix, is investing in this type of content, and it's making available this content to every single individual.
Perfect. So let me dive into a couple points you made there. I want to dive into specific points, but I think this all relates back to one of the bear points we're going to talk, which you always hear Netflix doesn't have any quality shows. They only have quantity. And we'll discuss that specific point in a second. But you mentioned the Netflix water cooler thing, and then you mentioned creators like working for Netflix. So let's start with creators. One of the, I 100% agree, right? Like if all else is equal and I'm a creator and a platform with 100 million people comes to me and a platform with 10 million people comes to me, if the money's the same, even if the money's cheaper, I'm probably going to go with the 100 million because, how many shows have gotten lost because they're on some small streaming service, right? So I agree with that. But on the other hand, I look at a lot of Netflix creator partnerships deals, and I feel like they have to be disappointed by them, right? Like I think about I think it's Ryan Murphy, the guy who did Glee and American Horror Story and all that. Politician was really disappointing on Netflix. Prom was just awful. I think Nurse Ratched or whatever didn't do that well. So there's that. Kenya Barris, the guy who created Blackish, 2018, he did this big buzzy leave where he was leaving Disney to go to Netflix. I don't even know if he put out a show for Netflix, and I think he left to go to Viacom. So I look at a lot of these buzzy partnerships they've had, and I agree with you. I think creators should want to work with them. But when I look at those buzzy partnerships, I say, they don't seem to be going well. They seem to be producing bad content. So what's going on with those when I push back at that part of the bull thesis?
Okay, so first of all, Netflix started to sign exclusive agreements with producers and directors in, I think it was 2017 in a meaningful scale. So that takes time to scale. And if you just think it for a second, it's huge because you have a service that barely had any original content in 2012, and 5 years later, they start signing exclusive agreements with producers,
and not just producers, the biggest producers in the world, right? These are big guys.
It's completely insane because back then Netflix, for example, Netflix movie slate was sustained by Adam Sandler movies, and that's great. But now you have The Rock and just announcing movies slate, so it's incredible. So you said that. Moreover, I want to add that not every single creator would go to Netflix. I mean, I think that upcoming actors, upcoming directors are the one who benefit the most from this type of companies. Why? Because
Yeah.
if you are an established director, Jennifer Aniston or whatever, you may go to the highest bidder. You don't really care. But if you are, there's a huge number of actors here in Spain and directors who have completely changed their careers, their trajectories, because they were featured in a popular Netflix show. So if you take, for example, I don't know if you've seen that, but Elite is a really popular show here in Spain. It's a Netflix show, and similar to Gossip Girl and that kind of stuff. I don't know if you. Well, it was a huge success, and it has completely changed the career of the actors involved. There's a popular slide in the representation that I really like. Is the amount of Instagram followers that
I
the
love it
actors,
when they show that. Yeah.
and it's really good. And another example, for example, I don't know if you heard of this one, but Abigail Cohen, who is the who performs in Wings. The Last Wish is another Netflix series. I mean, there's an Instagram post, you can go up and look for it, crying in the middle of the night because their TV service was top 10 in the US. So that's the kind of influence that Netflix, I mean,
let me push back on one thing here, right? So I don't disagree with Netflix's star creating skills, right? But I do think there is something Netflix goes, and I love that slide where they say, "Hey, look how many Instagram followers one of our breakout stars got." But that's not different than a breakout star in any medium, right? Like I'm sure the people who were starring, I watch so little network TV at this point, I don't know. But the Arrowverse over on CW, which Netflix helps makes extremely popular, right? But the Arrowverse on CW, those guys have huge followings, tons of fans, tons of Instagram followers and stuff, right? And that's just on the CW. And I'm sure there are, if I looked at Fox's shows or ABC, the ABC, what is it? Fresh Off the Boat. All those people were like breakout stars and breakout hits. So how much is Netflix actually like? I don't think there's anything that says Netflix per se is driving more breakout stars per show than everything else, or because of their skill, maybe they would. But how would you push back on that?
I think what you mean is that this is Netflix is doing it at a global scale. I mean, this kind of linear TVs, these stars would only get fame on a national scale. But on the other side, you have national actors who barely speak in English and can be famous, at Japan or countries that you'd never think it was going to be possible. So that's one of the main points I like to make. And the other is that there are benefits in capturing the most amount of viewership if you are the platform, the de facto platform. So you just turn Netflix, watch on Netflix, and you then go to the other platforms if you want to watch something specific. But you don't turn Netflix, or most of the times 80% of the content comes from Netflix suggestions from the screen, and that's hugely important because it allows you don't really know what are you going to watch, but you're sure that you'll be entertained, and that's one of the main aspects. That's on a global scale and difficult to achieve.
It's perfect. And let's bring back. So you mentioned the water cooler, what I call the water cooler thing, right? Where Netflix drives the cultural conversation. And there's a great. I love the clip you have in your article where in 2020 of the 10 most searched shows globally, I think Netflix had 9 of the 10, and then of the most searched movies globally, Netflix had like half of the 10 or something. Right now, 2020 for movies might have been a little different, but it shows Netflix shows are reverberating throughout the world at a rate that's different than everyone else's. But on the other hand, I think a frequent pushback is, where is Netflix's Game of Thrones? Like something like Game of Thrones just completely breaking, or all the Disney Plus shows. I feel like Netflix shows are probably watched more, but this might just be me personally. I think the buzz around the Disney Plus shows. So I think a big pushback here would be like, yes, Netflix shows are popular. You look at Bridgerton, you look at The Witcher, but I don't think any of them have hit the same level as of a traditional.
No, not yet.
Yeah. So how would you think about that?
I agree with you. Not yet, but I think that's a quote I really like. Quantity helps with quality.
Yeah.
So that's powerful because at the end of the day, where's the next Star Wars going to come from? Probably with Netflix. Why?
Yeah.
Because you are just producing so much content on a global scale from global producers. I mean, and creativity and quality is not exclusive of the United States. It happens on a global scale, but uh, that wasn't previously feasible. That wasn't creators all over the world uh, didn't have a platform where they could, uh, they could display the talent. And I think eventually they will come up with something as big as Disney shows. I mean, Disney has a bigger advantage over creating and monetizing franchises over Netflix because you think for a second, you have a company that is designed for creating and monetizing franchises. You have the parks, you have the every single aspect of the company is focused around cultivating and nurturing their franchises. And I think they could eventually come up with Disney like shows, but it will take time. I think just pause for a second. 8 years ago, Netflix didn't have any original content. So if you just think for a second, because movies and shows take a lot of time to produce, 3 or more years. So they are now investing into their 2023 or 24 slate, and it takes time. So I think eventually they will come up with this type of content.
You mentioned Disney's design to produce franchises, and we'll definitely talk Disney Plus in a second. But one of the things that I think gives Disney a critical advantage is the theme park ownership, right? They use the theme parks. Do you think at some point Netflix needs to own theme parks or kind of live experiences, I'll call it?
I think they will, or they could eventually expand towards that area. But I think comparisons with Disney are not relevant. I would compare Netflix to YouTube. I mean, they're following a similar playbook. Netflix wants to own not only your franchises, because, I mean, if you just think for a second, Star Wars is popular and most of the Disney franchises are very popular, but the bulk of our time is not, I mean, Netflix wants to own the bulk of our time, not just the big franchises, the blockbusters. Netflix wants to own the comedy, the content that is called not quality, because there are times that you don't want to spend, what's super entertainment, super created, in-depth content, and you just want to relax and watch content that is not as good that you enjoy. So I think they are following the aggregators approach. They want to own premium content, and they didn't have to expand that way. They could, but I don't think they need to.
Yeah, and to me, the thing that always people scream, "Oh, they don't have the quality," and I look at them, and I kind of look at some of the shows that Netflix has revived. You know, you look at you look at Cobra Kai, a couple others that other networks canceled, literally canceled, and Netflix picks them up and turns them into international smash hits. And I look at that and I say, other networks are they've got these hugely valuable shows, they can't get an audience, and then you put them on Netflix and they're breakout hits. Like, to me, that just speaks to how big the power of this platform. Do you want to add anything onto like the or the revival? Go ahead.
Yeah, I think quality is subjective. You cannot judge quality because, for example, there are linear here in Spain. It's almost dead among people. They're so similar to, I don't know if you watch this, or Too Hot to Handle. It's kind of like reality show on Netflix. Well, you laugh, but they're this huge following among these type of shows, and teenagers love this type of content. They love it, and is that quality? You could argue it's not, but if there are hundreds or millions of people watching this type of content, you'll eventually have to do this. And super unlikely Disney or other type of competitors will span towards these areas. And I think it's a really important part of television. Television is not only drama or fiction, or you have to own this type of content. And also, I think tastes or global tastes are a function of what was previously available. on a global level. So that's hugely influenced by US content, and tastes have to be educated through creation and through discovery. And you may you might not know that you are a huge terror fan, but if you eventually get some, uh, Japanese terror movies, this is completely strange. But Netflix allows this type of discovery or creation, similar to Spotify in many aspects. You may not know that you like this some kind of music, but eventually, this is kind of interesting. I really like this, and you know, allows you to try out new things, new genres, new categories. I think that's a huge asset.
Yeah, 100% agree. One of the cool things about Netflix is if you go on and like, as a Netflix bull, you might not want to hear this, but me and my best friend share a Netflix account. We got that password sharing good. But like, if I go on my profile and then I go on his profile, it's almost a completely different service.
It's completely different. It's completely different. I've got on slide in the report in the write up that discovery and creation has evolved throughout the years. And if you just look at the slide, it's just the screens are completely different. The recommended movies are completely different. You have terror fan, and even the clip, the clip that he gets shown, the Witcher clip, he gets shown the Witcher clip, and it's more terrifying and induces horror fans to watch this. Instead, the other account gets on a more generic clip of the series. I think that's incredible. I think it's not very commented, but user experience and creation and discovery Netflix is vastly superior than other competitors that don't even have these capabilities. And this lead, I think, it's only going to increase in the next decade.
Perfect. Well, that's actually a great segment too. I think outside of I think we've addressed the quality and quantity argument, but I think the new big bear case, and I generally don't talk about quarterly earnings on these podcasts because I want them to be somewhat evergreen and more focused on longer term, but I do think the quarterly earnings in this case is useful. Netflix reported earnings a couple weeks ago. Subscriber ads was way below what I think people were expecting. And I think they kind of pulled down their target for the year. And I think people are starting to say two things. Well, their subscriber ads are hitting a new low right now. And that's just happening as all the competition that we've been talking about for years is kind of popping up, right? The Disney Plus is getting ramped. Disney Plus is over 100 million subs. Discovery Plus just ramped. Paramount Plus, HBO Max is ramping. Hulu, Peacock, all these services are finally here. There's finally a viable competitive space. And I think people are looking at the viable competitive space and Netflix kind of stalling out this year on subs and saying, oh, is Netflix's advantage as big as we thought? Is the competition actually going to beat them back? How would you respond to that?
Okay, so it's really funny because those competitors that you just named are mostly US based. So there's barely any competition outside. And you just look at Netflix pricing power in the US, it's the highest among other geographies. So among a huge competitive environment, as you just called, Netflix has been able to increase pricing power in the US at a 9% clip since 2013. And they just recently ruled another price increase in 2021. There's a substantial price increase, and there was no churn, like zero. And management stated that churn in the US was below the pricing increase. So I think that's insane, and that can help you understand why I think Netflix has no competition in the international landscape, and in the US is more muted. So I think there was a huge pull forward of subs in 2020. Obviously, if you just the COVID helped a lot to the business, and I think the next quarters may be bumpy, and I don't think the market understands Netflix that well, because whenever they disclose the subs below guidance, the company just goes down 10%. And I mean, the next decade is going to be bumpy for sure. There's always misses on subs, but I think they're still in a good position. Most of the competition that you just named was previously in the market, or the new competition is not. I wouldn't say they are viable in the long term. So the discoveries, the peacocks, I think those are zeros, or eventually bundle and create a compelling service, because the value proposition is simply not there.
Okay, it's interesting you said Discovery, because Discovery is actually the one legacy media player that I like. But why? Let me push back a little bit. So you mentioned Discovery in particular. If you want to talk Discovery in particular, we can, or we can just talk to the larger legacy bundle. But
I wasn't talking about Discovery in particular, but yeah, so.
No, that's fine. I look, it's no. I take no offense. I'm just looking for a discussion, but I do think like the legacy media space needs to.
No. I mean, I was meaning that the other subscale players do not represent a threat, in my opinion. I wasn't talking about. I mean, Discovery. I haven't watched Discovery, but I mean, I was referring to the other subscales players.
No,
that's what I mean.
Again, don't take anything. But let me choose someone different than Discovery, right? Viacom,
no.
Which is launching Paramount Plus, right? And I think many media observers, myself included, think Paramount Plus is going to be in for a tough time. But the counter would be, hey, with Paramount Plus, we have an incredible hook to get people in, right? We have the legacy CBS channel where we can advertise it all the time. Plus, we have NFL streaming, right? They'll have all the AFC games streaming on Paramount Plus. That is a big hook to get people in that Netflix doesn't particularly have, right? And yes, their brands aren't that great, but if you look, they've got the Paramount movie studios. They've got a huge movie library. They do have some really good franchises in there. They've got Star Trek. They've got Star Trek. They've got SpongeBob for kids. I know the Challenge, MTV's reality show, has a pretty big following online. So they do have great brands, right? So when you say they're dead, and I get it, like Netflix is a much bigger content spend, all this, but Viacom does have a hook. So like I could go through every single legacy media provider and show the hook that they've had. But why do you think these guys are going to struggle so much when they've got that interesting hook?
Sure. I think sports is going to be tough to maintain from this type of companies. I mean, there's going to be a huge. I think it's difficult to establish a competitive advantage in sports. Why? Because this is all about the high speeder. The NFLs of the world want to extract the most amount of money. So Amazon ambitions are going to go towards sports. Well, we just recently saw that Amazon is disclosed that they have secured NFL rights for certain matches, and I think that's going to get eventually tougher. And sports are going to be one of the areas that big tech is going to deploy the capital, I think.
So I don't disagree with you. I think sports, they're always going to get they're always going to get the most rights, and either somebody uses them as a loss leader, like a big tech company to get you in your platform, or the sports just go direct. I don't disagree with you, but Viacom now has the AFC locked up for, I think, the next 10 years. So why can't I look at Viacom's AFC relationship as a loss leader to get people into the Paramount Plus universe?
Sure, that's interesting. I think as long as they retain sports, that I mean, fans are always going to watch this type of content. But when it comes to media, aside sports, premium entertainment, it is very difficult that this type of companies are going to have good content. Why? Because first of all, they are not global. Tasters, as I said, are global. I mean, in the US, you may watch 50% or whatever percent of your shows are US based, but you may find an Indian movie entertainment, and you may find a Japanese show compelling, and you don't have that. And Netflix has access to global creativity. That's huge. Now, second of all, I mean, these type of companies do not have the what it takes to further invest in developing and acquiring new content. What I mean by this is that they are going to have a tough time in securing exclusive agreements. They are going to have a tough time in locking up creativity, because biggest creators are going to eventually run up to Netflix of the world, the Disney's, and it's going to be tough. And then I think this type of platforms may eventually license their content to bigger companies. I think sports, as long as they retain sports, they will do fine. But you don't. Seems real unlikely to me that you just go to Paramount Plus to watch, premium entertainment, and you spend there 2 hours per day. It's really unlikely because Paramount Paramount content is not can be compared with Netflix because it's not global, has no scale. I mean, that's pretty much it. No creation, no discovery, no. I do not. I'm not very bullish in this type of companies, but sports may sustain their subs for the long run, for a certain period of time.
Yeah, I think the other bear case on Paramount, and you've got a clip in there, like you look at what Paramount Plus, all these guys are spending in terms of content versus what Netflix is spending, and remember,
yeah, it's all about the value proposition at the end. I mean, at the end of the day. Maybe the sports fan are always going to have the platform that has the favorite content, but at the end of the day, you are basically paying up 15 or 16 or whatever dollars per month, and you are just watching so much content. I mean, in terms of millions, you just think for a second, but because media and media consumption is a tricky business. I think whenever you watch, for example, The Witcher, you don't realize the budget that's involved in just a few hours, because you just binge the show in a few hours of time, and that show may have cost 200 million to make, and you just binge 200 million, and that's hard. That's a hard business model. If you are
did you hear about the Amazon, their new Lord of the Rings show, what they're going to invest
500 million per season
episode?
And that's, I think big tech is leading towards big splashy titles or sports. Why? Because if you just have content get lost, if you don't have super creation capabilities, if you are not the de facto platform where people spend their time, smaller content gets lost. I mean, I think that's it.
Yeah, no, this is something I started talking about this a couple years ago, but there was the show Mr. Mercedes, which I think it's on Peacock now, but it went 3 seasons. It was based on a Stephen King book. I think it got incredible reviews. It had a pretty buzzy cast, but it was on like the DirecTV channel or something. I can't remember exactly, but it never broke out because even though it was getting great reviews, everything. It was on a channel no one had, and people wonder what is king. People say content is king, and if you've got Disney Plus content, if you've got Disney's Marvel IP and stuff, I guess content is king. People go find it, but for the most part, it's actually distribution is king, right? Like, if I have a 7.5 show, and 500
that's why I argue that. Yeah, that's why I argue that aggregators represent a bigger threat to Netflix than other streaming companies. That's main bear case because if aggregators have the relationship with the customer, and they are somehow able to create a bundle that includes subscale players. Now, this type of content wouldn't get lost on these platforms, and that could represent a threat to Netflix, because nowadays Netflix has been benefits from picking up obscure shows or shows that are not performing that well. I mean, Cobra Kai was not obscure by any means, but was not performing well in YouTube, and they just pick up the show. So it has a huge popularity. Same with Lucifer, with Riverdale, with You. There's tons of shows, and if aggregators control the relationship with the customer, I mean, they will lose that type of advantage. But sure.
You mentioned aggregators as a threat. Roku in the past year bought Quibi. I think they're hiring a lot of talent. So are you worried long-term about Roku's ability to maybe, I don't want to say supplant, but Roku is clearly making a move to build a Netflix competitor. Are you worried about them?
Yeah, I think the biggest threat of Netflix in the next decade are going to be aggregators. Roku just renamed their Quibi acquired content as Roku Originals, and they are going to invest towards further growing that content. But it's interesting because aggregators do not own content; they just aggregate others. If you want to Roku's ambitions Roku's long-term ambitions are becoming the YouTube of TV, right? But the thing is that it's really hard because I think there are a lot of stuff here because I mean the main point is that user experience is hard to master. I mean, in order to become an aggregator, you have to have top level user experience, and in order to do that, any given user has to find compelling content that they like, and you have to have the compelling content, and the user has to find it. So you have to have super great discovery capabilities. There's that. There's aggregators nowadays. Aggregators are not really, you know, not really end game aggregators because they just in the Roku channel you have the Roku channel, but there's no, for example, Disney content. You cannot. Well, Fire TV, new Fire TV operating system, for example. Has features where you can just watch Disney from the home screen, and then you on autoplay Netflix title starts playing, and that's what I mean by end game aggregators. But I think the content will always be worse in this type of aggregators. Why? Because you rely on external third parties, right? Who are the external third parties? Most of the external third parties are linear. I mean, outside of the US, who are the third parties who provide you content? Linear companies, linear TV companies. These linear TV companies do not have this cultural, this mindset of investing for the long run. Maybe they cannot spread the cost of failure among a huge subscriber base. It's really difficult to do, to maybe a 300 million budget Spanish film. That's unthinkable because these type of companies haven't done that in his whole life. Then these type of companies are not bold by any means. They are not going to invest in titles that they think that are not going to be, hugely popular or mainstream, and it's going to be hard to have really special content or, this bold type of content that Netflix does all the time. They have a ton of failures, but that's necessary because if you are creating new content that hasn't been created before, it's necessary. There are changing a lot of landscapes in animation. They are completely changing the game. Animation had been always controlled by Disney, and it's incredible that without any meaningful IP, they've been able to create a substantial animation powerhouse in just a few years without relying on meaningful IP. They just rely on their creators. And Netflix brand become a group of creators. They don't rely on brands, and the brand is their creators. And I think because of this type of these two factors, aggregators will have a hard chance or hard time displacing Netflix, but it could happen. I think that's the biggest threat. But I think eventually Netflix will have better content, and moreover, supply economics and value proposition. Because unlike user, this is not. You have to understand that. Well, you probably understand, but this is not an industry with user-generated content. So in order to create a movie or so, you have to contact many people. Many people are involved in the creation of the show. That takes a long period of time, years, and costs a lot of money. So if you cannot do it by your own, so aggregators don't make much sense, or the value proposition is not that clear because you have someone who's investing for you, someone who's spreading the cost of failure, someone who's willing to make bold bets with a completely decentralized culture that greenlights content in a local, local teams. They don't rely on centralized decision in order to greenlight content. They can greenlight content in a local manner, and they are able to offer all of that content for a flat $50 subscription fee. The value proposition is super good for the consumer. And if you just aggregate third-party linear content, value proposition is set to be worse. Prices are going to be much higher, and content is going to be worse. That's what I think.
Let me ask another question. This is
Sure.
a surprisingly popular bear case. Years and years ago, I believe Netflix used to disclose churn, and then they
Sure.
stopped.
Yeah.
And I think a frequent question is, if Netflix, if their economics are so good, if their churn
Yeah.
is so
Why don't
good,
they?
why don't they disclose churn?
Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure. Maybe for competitive reasons, but I'm not sure. But if you just look at the US, if you want to get you want to get a grasp of the industry dynamics and how different players have the levels of churn, you have third-party data, of course, and Netflix is often the lowest, the lowest end. And but if you don't want to rely on third-party data, you can just look at US, because US has, I previously said, they have increased prices at a super high rate. I'm certainly surprised that there hasn't been any meaningful churn in the US, and that's the most competitive market, because outside of the US there's no competition. I mean, you could argue that US is an oligopoly, and there's no competition outside. Netflix is years ahead of everyone else in the local scene, but I think everyone is super focused on the US, the US, the US, the US. But internationally, Netflix is much stronger, and in the market where Netflix is supposedly the more competitive market, while Netflix value proposition is comparatively weaker, there's no churn, and they have increased the prices at a 9% clip or something like that for the past 6 years. So I think that's impressive. This is more like your telephone bill that you just pay no matter what, and you don't really ask yourself if you should be paying up Netflix if they just increase the prices. I think there's a long way ahead in terms of pricing power.
Let me stick with the economics of the business for a second. And this is actually diametrically opposed, right? But for years, one of the bear cases has been, look, Netflix, and I'm going to use this term acknowledging that it's a pun. The bear case would be Netflix is a house of cards, right? The only reason that the Netflix model works is because they are a bubble. They've got the super cheap cost of capital, whether it's on the debt side or the equity side. And the moment the market stops funding their perpetual losses, the whole thing's going to collapse in a house of cards, right? So that was one side. The other side of the bear case recently, which is kind of interesting, Netflix with their Q1 earnings announced, I think it was their first buyback ever. Maybe they did some years and years ago, but the first time they're going to become a capital returner, right? And the second bear case would be, oh, look, they're returning capital. Like the business model sucks. And now they're just a levered return of capital story. The growth story is over. And it's funny because those are diametrically opposed. And the second one is a newer bear case. But could you speak to both sides of that, I guess, like the cost of capital coin that I mentioned there?
Okay. So I like to highlight a quote that I really like. I think it's Jerry Capital on Twitter, who used to say, bears are worried about pricing power. When subs increase, and when subs pricing increases are imposed, and subs do not increase at a higher rate, bears are worried about pricing out subs. So I mean, I think it's funny because whenever Netflix increases prices, subs do not increase at higher rates, and when Netflix decides to keep prices the same, subs tend to increase higher. Tend to rise higher. So the first bear case, I think Netflix was a dangerous company. It was a risky company a few years ago, quite risky because you rely on others' content. You rely on licensing content from other people. You don't have your own content, and they didn't even have the scale and the amount of international presence that they now have. And I think it was Bill Miller who got pitched Netflix in the early days, and who rejected the idea because he thought that it was a pretty risky business. And nowadays, a couple of years ago, he bought the company, acknowledging that the business had changed, and it's a more defensive business right now. So first, to your first point, I think it's I think the early days Netflix could be compared to what you just said, but nowadays they have the ability. They just said that they do not rely on external debt in order to sustain the operations. You just everyone saw that if cash spent is slows down, Netflix is hugely profitable, and they can tweak a bit gas content spend if they need to. I mean, they're investing years ahead, and they would probably not do this, but I think this outlines how Netflix controls its own destiny right now, and it's not relying on third parties in order to execute its strategy. So I think it's only execution race right now. And to the other point, what was the other point? I forget. I forgot.
No, I like all the points you just made. You know, I guess the one other thing is it's just interesting to think back. I mean, Bill Miller in the early days until probably 16 or 17, Netflix hadn't reached what we call escape velocity. And it was like every time they raised money it was all a bet the company thing, because they knew we need to hit scale before anyone else can, or else we're dead.
Yeah.
And
become HBO before HBO becomes us. Yeah, that's good.
The interesting thing is, like, because they were in a bet the company mode, and you look at all their competitors, like there's no doubt HBO, Disney, all these guys had way better assets, better brands, everything. Yeah. But because they had a very profitable legacy business, they were always dipping their toes into it, right? Yeah. And like they're even HBO today, like HBO Max and HBO Go, like nobody could describe what was different, and it was insane. So it's funny, but because Netflix was always in bet the company mode, maybe they were slightly less risky than the other companies who could never do that.
I mean, I've never come up with a company that has changed its business model. Well, maybe, but has changed its business model over the decades so many times. So the first transition from DVD to streaming, second transition from license to original. Now they're securing the international expansion on top. I think the culture here is super nimble. They are super adaptable company, and that's a huge asset. And the other point that you just make on the buybacks, I mean, businesses are designed to, or the end goal should be to return capital to shareholders. And it's funny that people complain when Netflix start returning capital, and I don't think I have seen some commentaries about, well, Netflix has no other place to deploy its capital, and it's therefore seeking to has nothing to do with the capital, and they decided to buy back stock in order to sustain their already elevated or bubbly valuation. But I think they are super good capital allocators. They don't want to keep cash that they don't need in the business. They are optimizing the business. I mean, they are just returning capital because they think they don't need it. They are close to invest 20 billion of cash content this year. I think it's 17. They just disclosed in the recent call. And I don't think there's lack of options. I think content takes time. You can't just deploy 50 billion of capital. Yes, it takes time. You have to build local teams. You have to build expertise around many areas, many categories, many countries. It's difficult. You can do it in a year or two, and it takes time. They will eventually scale the cash content. But in the meantime, they have become so profitable. Or, I mean, not profitable, but I mean, they can sustain a buyback, and they decide to do it. And I think it's a great option.
Let me talk. So obviously Netflix, you have a position in it, and let me just, everything is an opportunity cost, right? When I'm buying Netflix, I'm choosing, there's 3,000 other stocks in the world I can't buy. But so when I look at Netflix, and I'll just do opportunity cost of media, right? But Netflix right now, enterprise value is 250 billion. If I went and looked across kind of the media and tech space, I think my comparables would be, well, I could go buy Netflix for 250 billion, or I could buy Disney for about 400 billion. And I get, all those great brands, Disney Plus, the parks, all that, right? Could buy that for 400 billion. I could go buy Netflix, what some people think is Netflix 2.0. I could go buy Spotify for 50 billion. That's now the business model is more in flux, but it's a lot cheaper, right? If I want to stick in media, Discovery and Viacom are both around $40 billion. And you talked about how they've got a hard business going forward, but those are very profitable as that legacy bundle rolls off. How quickly that rolls off, who knows, but those are very profitable. The early returns from their streaming services seem to be going pretty well. $40 billion enterprise value, less than 10 times EV to EBITDA. These things, there's not a lot of CapEx, so these things print free cash flow in the meantime. So when I'm looking at all these, why is Netflix the place I want to put money instead of if we're just limited to those other couple companies?
I agree. I agree with you. I think Netflix opportunity in terms of future returns is definitely lower now than it was 1 year ago, a couple of years ago. I think valuation is more demanding right now. I still think you can underwrite 15% returns over the long run, but I think valuation is more stretched. I definitely agree. I wouldn't be comfortable with some of the, the discovery. I mean, the linear companies, linear stuff. But for sure, you could own Spotify, you could own Amazon instead, and I think they might be more compelling picks. I think valuation is more stretched, but Netflix is super volatile, and now it's trading at $500. But who knows? Maybe in just 2 months, stock could correct a lot. So I have a long-term position in it. It's not huge, but the thing I want to outline, I think most of people miss, is that this is still day one in terms of streaming penetration, in terms of hours watched, in terms of pricing power, in terms of, so there's still a long run towards, I think they can get to eventually 500 million subscribers. So yeah, sure, valuation is more stretched, but I think there's still a long run. Streaming is definitely not bigger. It's less than 10% of US TV time. So you have to take into account that it's still early days.
Last question for me, and then I'm going to give you last thoughts. For years, people would ask Netflix about competition, just Disney Plus, HBO, and Netflix would always respond like, "We're aware of competition, but our main competition is not Disney Plus. They would use one of two things. They would either say it's linear TV, or they would say it's sleep and Fortnite and all these other options, right?" So when I look at that, the one that jumps out at me is Fortnite, right? Because I think increasingly the worlds of storytelling and video games are going to collide. So I do wonder at some point.
I definitely agree with you. Yeah.
Does Netflix need to get into the video game?
I think there's a great opportunity in the long run, in order to. I mean, if you just look at Netflix business is storytelling. Video games are in storytelling as well, but it's interactive storytelling that you just is different, right? You create your own story, like video game, and I think there's a huge opportunity going forward. I mean, if you just think it for a second, think about more immersive storytelling, maybe in VR, who knows? And Netflix just designs the story and you are present. You are like fully living the story. I think human nature will always be attracted towards storytelling, towards a more passive form of entertainment, because there are certain parts of the day where you don't want to play a video game. You just want to, you just want to passively watch content. But I think interactive storytelling, I think Netflix has proved that. It was called Bandersnatch. They released some, interactive storytelling in the past. I think that's a very compelling opportunity, and I think it's super interesting. No other competitors will. I think they will probably be leading the industry when it comes to innovation. And I think that's a great opportunity going forward. And I agree, video games or other forms of, entertainment like TikTok, YouTube are competing more in terms of our, daily watch time than Disney or Amazon Prime. So I think that's important.
Well, hey, I want to turn it over to you. Last thoughts. Is there anything you want to wrap up, or is there anything you wish we had hit a little bit harder, or that we didn't hit that you wish we had hit? I'll just flip it over to you. Sure.
So I think Netflix is often thought as a company, as a house of cards, as you just said, that whenever competition wants to increase, their offerings or wants to improve their offerings, Netflix is going to fall off. But if you just think it for a second, I do not think Netflix has any competition. Really, standard peers. I mean, they have similar companies, but no one is following the same playbook. I mean, no one is willing to play by the same rules. No one is willing to, invest in so many verticals, so many countries, trying to basically own premium entertainment. Basically, they are following the aggregator playbook. And for example, if you just take Apple, loss leader for their for the bundle, and splashy titles. It's really unlikely that they expand locally with more obscure titles and more verticals. Why? Because, as I previously said, creation and discovery are hugely important assets. You need to master those in order to have local content, because if you don't master those, the content gets lost. People do not find compelling content. Netflix just released Fast Loves, the features that allow you to further create your content and discover new content in an easier way. They're always on the forefront of innovation when it comes to creation and discovery. Top 10 list, trending, I don't know, for you list. I mean, the other competitors barely have. You just enter Amazon Prime, they have great content, but the creation is simply not there. And it's funny because you just look why Spotify is succeed, because of their creation capabilities, because of a better user experience. And it's funny that you could argue that big tech would destroy Netflix when they haven't been able to make it end on Spotify prospects. And the business is much more defensive because you have to create your own content, you have to build local teams, you have to, it's more defensive. And I think overall, the next 10 years are going to be really interesting when it comes to content creation. I think we're going to see content that hadn't been produced in our lifetimes, and we'll see franchises, international franchises. I think it's gonna be super fun. And I think that's pretty much it. I think still the opportunity is compelling. The management team still driving at the forefront of the business, and they are there for the next decade. So I think it's a pretty compelling opportunity.
Perfect. What are you watching on Netflix right now? What's top of your Netflix queue?
Sure. I'm not a huge media, I do not watch a lot of media. That's why I think it's important to not extrapolate your own taste or your way of seeing the world towards your investment. Because I do not have Facebook or I do not have Instagram, so that'd be hard. But I recently saw Shadow and Bone. I don't know if you heard about that, but it's similar to the Shadow and Bone. Shadow and Bone is similar to The Witcher.
Oh, I read the. Go ahead. I'll tell you my story in a second. Yeah.
I'm biased because I'm a fiction fantasy fan, and I really like this kind of stuff. But I think it was super fun.
Okay, so I love fiction. I love fiction, and I actually read the Shadow and Bone series earlier this year, and I was really disappointed with it. So Six of Crows is her other book, where Kaz, it's actually a separate book series, but I hear they incorporate them into Shadow and Bone. I loved her books with Kaz. I did not like Shadow and Bone, but my wife has been binging those and really enjoying them. But it just shows there's tons of stories out there, and I heard it got good reviews. I was disappointed because I might have to watch it because I read it as well. But,
overall, before you just wrap up, I'm sorry if my English is a bit rusty, and it's been a long time since I did my long call. Thank you very much for the opportunity.
Hey, Javi, I think you did fantastic. I didn't have a problem with it. You were awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. Guys, the link to his piece is going to be in the show notes. It's Blind Squirrel Substack is the thing. His piece was awesome. I encourage everyone to go read it. Encourage everyone to follow it. And Javi, looking forward to having you on for a second one at some point.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Andrew. See you.
Have a good one, man.